Today's daf is daf samach dalid, and we're going to start on the bottom of daf samach gimel amid beis. If you count up from the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 lines up from the bottom is an analysis of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is a little bit strange because the Mishnah is talking about what's called chatas ha'of, and it says b'chol makom ha'isa kshera. Now, the Mishnah seems to indicate that you could do the avoda of the chatzof anywhere on the mizbeach, but yet the Mishnah goes ahead and says that the avoda should be in the Drom Ma'arav, the Drom Ma'arav meaning the southwest part of the mizbeach. So how do we reconcile this? Maika Omar, Omar of Ashi Hochi Komar. And the Gemara now is going to analyze the different parts of the avoda of chatas ha'of, which are three parts. There's going to be the malika, and then there's the hazah, and then there's the mitzui hadam, which is sort of parallel to shfichas dam al hayisod. So here's how we're interpreting the Mishnah, according to Rav Ashi. B'chol makom ha'isa ksheril milikasa. When the Mishnah says that any place on the mizbech is kshera, that's referring to the malika. The malika could be done anywhere on the mizbech. However, with regard to the hazah, here there's a special place in the mizbeach. Elazeh haya mekoma lahazah, but the hazah has to be in Drom Ma'arav of the mizbeach. And Tanina lahad Tan Rabbanon, and that which we learned in the Mishnah we have in a brisa. Milaka b'chol makom b'mizbeach ksheira. So the malika, again, here it's explicit, can be done anywhere, any place on the mizbeach. But hiza, again, we're going to have a little bit of a contradiction here in the brisa because the brisa originally says hiza dama v'chol makom ksheira. That likewise the hazas hadam of the dam chatos ha'of can be done anywhere on the mizbeach. But then it says hiza v'lo mitzah kshera. And then it says u'bavad she'itein michut hasikra ulamato midam nefesh. So let's just say a few words about the word milamata. The mizbeach was split in half from the 10 amos of the height of the mizbeach. There was a chut hasikra, some sort of a belt that the mizbeach wore around the middle of the mizbeach, which means 5 amos up from the bottom, from the azara. And here's a fundamental difference between chatas ha'of and olas ha'of. Chatas ha'of requires hazah lemata, and olas ha'of requires hazah lemala. We haven't gotten to olas ha'of yet, but I'm just mentioning it up front. We're dealing with chatas ha'of, and the hazah of chatas ha'of has to be lemata. Michut hasikul lamata, meaning the bottom half of the mizbeach. So again, the Gemara is going to ask Mike Omer, you opened up this brisa by saying he's a dama b'chol makom, which implies that hazah could be anywhere, even lamala michut hasikul. And then you completed the brisa by saying bilvad, but only on condition that yitain michut hasikul lamata, that the hazas adam must take place, and this is absolutely critical, in the bottom half of the mizbeach. So how do we reconcile this? Hochi ka'amar, we're going to go through the same thing that we said before, that malaka b'chol makom b'mizbeach ksher. As far as the malika is concerned, it could be anywhere in the mizbeach. It could be on the bottom half of the mizbeach, the top half of the mizbeach, it could be on the gaga mizbeach, anywhere. But mitzah dama, and we're going to soon see that the mitzui means that if there's dam left in the in the tzavar, in the neck of the bird after he already did the hazah, but there's leftover dam, so that leftover dam requires mitzui. Mitzui means where he squeezes it against the mizbeach. But mitzvah dama b'chol makom mizbeach shera. Once again, the mitzvah adam could take place anywhere. It could be not only on the bottom half of the mizbeach, but even on the top half of the mizbeach. And the reason for this is because mitzvah itself is not critical. Even if he didn't do any mitzvah, let's say there was no dam left over, then the carbon is kosher and it's ola. It registers. So if you can do without the mitzvah, because the mitzvah is not essential, not critical, then certainly if you did the mitzvah anywhere in the mizbeach, even on the top half of the mizbeach, it's still valid. And now we turn to Daf Samach Daled, today's Daf. Shem hiza v'lo mitzvah kshera. As we said before, that if you do the azals and the mitzvah was left out completely, the carbon, the chatasof is still kshera. But now we get to the hazah itself, and with the mitzvah anywhere, the malika anywhere, but the mitzvah bilvad sheite michutz michud hasikol lamato midam nefesh, the lifeblood of the bird requires a hazah, because now we're referring to hazah on the bottom half of the mizbeach, below the chut hasikra, and that's critical. Now, I'll just mention that Rashi points out here that, you could have possibly suggested that maybe there were two different hazoyos, but Rashi says that the language here of the Brisa indicates that there was one hazah. Because if there were two hazos, it should have said he's a midama, part of the dam. But he's a dama means, the entire volume of dam. We go on in the Mishnah, and the Mishnah says shlosha dvarim. So let's just reiterate the Mishnah here. Shlosha dvarim, the Mishnah says, Haisa osa keren mishameshes milamata ushlosha milamala. So the Mishnah says that there were three things that required lamata and below the chut hasikra, and there were three that required lamala. And now we're going to study the three that require lamata. What are the three that require lamata? Number one, chatas ha'of, as we just discussed. Number two, hagashos, which has to do with bringing the mincha to the mizbeach. And finally, the shiori adam, obviously it's on the yisod, which is below the chut hasikra. So the Gemara says, how do we derive these three halachos from the pasuk, from the Torah, and they require lamata? So let's go through them one by one. Chatas ha'of ha'amoran. Chatas ha'of is derived from an equation to the carbon mincha, and that we had back on Daf Samach Gimel, that the mincha is on the bottom half of the mizbeach, and by virtue of a hekesh, so too chatas ha'of is on the bottom half of the mizbeach. And that was the Gemara back on Samach Gimel. Hagashos, how do we know that the bringing of the mincha has to be done in the corner of the mizbeach, which is called the Drom Myrov, the Myrov Droma, or Dromis Myrovis. And that's derived from a pasuk Dichsiv El Pnei HaMizbeach. So the Gemara back on Samach Gimel had two psukim, and they were both in Vayikra Perek Vav, and it seems that the Pnei HaMizbeach is the south, the Darom side of the Mizbeach, and it's called in the Torah's language the front of the Mizbeach. But it also says in the pasuk, a different pasuk, it says Lifnei Hashem, and Lifnei Hashem is referring to the Ma'arav, because the Shechina is always in the Ma'arav, and that's the west side. So if you take together both psukim, one pasuk which indicates the Darom, which is called the Pnei HaMizbeach, and the other pasuk Lifnei Hashem, which is the Ma'arav, we get the conclusion that the mincha should be brought on the Darom Ma'arav corner of the Mizbeach. Shiori Adam Dichsiv es kol dam apor yishpoch el yisod Mizbeach. Let's read the pasuk. It says, "V'nasan hakohen min adam al karnas hamizbeach Torres." Fine. And then it says, "Ves kol dam apor yishpoch el yisod mizbach ha'ol asher pesach oel moed." So the Torah tells us that the shiori adam from the chatos hapnimis, which is in the heichal, has to be poured on the yisod of the mizbech hachitzoni, the mizbech ha'olah. And the Torah adds Pesach Oel Moed, and that teaches us that the shiorim has to be poured on that part of the yisod that is encountered by the Kohen Gadol as soon as he comes out of the heichal. And that's going to be on the western side of the Mizbeach. So that's in the case of a chatos hapnimis. Now, we have a hekesh to the chatos hachitzona, and there too, the shiori adam should be poured on that part of the yisod, which is close to the Kohen, when he comes down the kevesh, after he did again, in the case of chatos, if we're talking about arba matonos or arba kronos, he comes down and he immediately encounters the south side of the Mizbeach, because we're going to have to go over this over and over again, that the kevesh is always on the Doron. So since the yisod on the Doron would only have one amma, because the rest of that yisod was in the chelik of Binyamin. That was the sugya that we learned earlier. But on the south side, in the Doron, there was a part of the yisod that extended one amma at the point in which the south meets the west, at that corner. So that's how we derive the conclusion from this pasuk as Dama Par Yishpach Yisod Mizbeach, that it has to be on the Dorom Ma'arav, on the southwestern part or corner of the Mizbeach. Now the Mishnah tells us that there are three things that are lamala, right, that are performed on the top half of the Mizbeach. They're Nisuch HaMayim, which is during the 7 days of Pesach, of Sukkot, and that's where they did the Nisuch HaMayim, and Nisuch HaYayin, which would accompany all the Karbanos, and number 3, Olas HaOf. So again, until now we've been talking about Chatas HaOf, which we said is Lamata. Now we're talking about Olas HaOf, which is Lamala. And in principle, the Olas HaOf should be on the Mizrach Dromis, But we do it on the Ma'ariv Dromis. Why? Because Kshi Rabba Mizrach. There are too many Kohanim that are flooding the Mizrach, and therefore the overflow goes to the west, to the Ma'ariv. But if things are ideal, l'chatchila, and there's no Rabba Olav, then the avoda of the Olas Ha'of would be on the Darom Mizrach, not on the Darom Ma'ariv, not on the western side, but rather on the eastern side. Why do we want the eastern side if all things are equal? For the avoda of the Olas Ha'of my timer, Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Mivnesha Krova mi Beis Hadeshen. Now, the Beis Hadeshen is the place where they put the deshen. Deshen means the ashes. So what happens is that there was a pious, there was a gorol, and the Kohen that won that lottery would be the first one to start the avodah of the day in the Mikdash, and that was Haramas Hadeshen. He would go up to the top of the Mizbeach, where there was a maracha, where the fire was burning. And again, at that moment in time, the fire is not burning. So he would take a machta, he would shovel, the coals that were still alive and put them on the side, and then the other coals outside. And in the middle, there were coals that were already nisakel. They were completely consumed, and they were turned into ashes. And then he would take that ashes and put it out in the Beis Hadeshen, where it was absorbed into the ground. It was nivla. Now, Rabbi Yochanan points out that the Beis Hadeshen was right near the Drom Mizrach side, the southeast corner. And that's because the Mizbech was in the Darom, and in the east, that's where the Beis Hadeshen was. Now, again, the Beis Hadeshen is not only for the coals that were nisakel on the maracha, but it was also used for, let's say, for example, the ashes from the Hadlokas Hamenorah, and there were ashes from the ikul of the burning of the chalavim and that which is subject to Aktar al Gabi Mizbech, and all that was put into the Beis Hadeshen. So now, there's halacha, which is derived from the Torah. The Torah says, at the beginning of Vayikra, it says regarding the Olas Ha'of, Vehesir es mur'asa b'notsasa, vehishlich osa eitzel hamizbeach kedma. Kedma means to the east. El Mokum Hadeshen. So clearly the Torah identifies the location of the Beis Hadeshen as the east. And that's where the Torah requires that the Kohen, when he does the Avodas Olas Ha'of, he puts the Morasa B'notsasa. Now, exactly what Morasa B'notsasa is Machlokas Rashi and the Ramban. And Rashi has a whole theory here about what Morasa V'notsasa is, but basically it's kind of like the pupik of the what you call in Hebrew the kurkuman of the oaf, and it's quite it's all the kishkis, the zefek, and so forth. It's ma'us. It's something that's kind of like disgusting, and the Ramban has more of a literal translation of Morasa V'notsasa, which refers to the actual feathers of the oaf. But in any event, according to Rashi, the pasuk is teaching me that the crop, or the zefek, if you want to call it that, must be thrown into the same place where the Trumas Hadeshen was placed, where the Deshen was placed. And the pasuk before that says Umolak, and then it says Vehesa v'hishlich. The implication is that the Kohen does this zrika of Morasa V'notsasa, in the same place where the Malika is performed. So then, although, as we said, the if all things were equal, the place for the avodas olas ha'of was in the Darom Mizrach, but nevertheless, if the Mizrach was congested, then the avodah was shifted over to the southwest corner, right, to the Darom, but on the Myrav side, right? That's called Dromis Myravis. Because the Dromis Myravis, again, if you can't do it in the Mizrach, the Dromis Mizrachis, then the Dromis Myravis is the closest place to the Beis Hadeshin. And again, since the Torah requires v'hishlich es murasa v'notsasa, which is part of the avodas olas ha'of, therefore you want to make it, the avodah should be done in the area that's closest to the Beis Hadeshin, which would really be the Darom Mizrach, but in this case, because of the congestion in the Darom Mizrach, they shifted it over to the nearest place, which would be the Darom Myrav. Okay, now the next piece of Gemara requires quite a bit, and that's an understatement, of calculations. We'll try to do whatever we can. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Bo re'ei kama gadol kocha shel kohanim. So we're going back to this mitzvah in the Olas Ha'of of Hashlachas Murasa Binotsasa, and these parts of the bird are very light. And al piderech hateva, if you have something that's light, it's very difficult to throw it at a distance. Heavy things you can throw like a heavy rock at a distance. Right, the crop and the feathers are the lightest part of the bird, and yet the Kohen was able to throw the feathers of this olas ha'of for a distance of more than 30 amma. And now the Gemara is going to try to calculate, how do we know that the Kohen, when he did the avodah of the olas ha'of at the Darom Myrov of the Mizbeach, if there was congestion on the Darom Mizrach, how do we know that the amount of distance that he had to throw the crop and the feathers was more than 30 amos? How do we prove that? To establish, as Rabbi Yochanan said, the Kohanim had tremendous strength. Tisnat. And we're going to base ourselves on a Mishnah Masechta Talmud with regard to the Trumas Hadeshin. Not al machta shel kesef ol rosh mizbech. So this was the first Kohen doing the avodah at the break of dawn, and he got the pious, he got the lottery, and he took a machta, which was made of kesef. Machta means a shovel, and ol rosh mizbech. He ascended through the kevish up to the top of the mizbech. Upina es hagchol melchef. Those coals that were alive. And there's no mitzvah of Haromas Hadeshin on live coals. He had to push them one to one side and to the other side. And now he digs in with this machta min ha'mu'ukolos ha'pnimios, from the innermost coals that are burnt up completely, mukolos. They have to be completely burnt. And then they have a status of deshen. Now, after he collects the mu'ukolos, right, those ashes from the coals, into the machta, then yored. He goes down the kevesh, because again, he was now on top of the mizbech. Now he goes down the kevesh till he gil ritzvah, until he gets to the bottom of the kevesh, and he stands on the floor of the azor. Machzer panav klapei tzafon. he turns towards the Mizbeach. Now the Mizbeach is now in its Safon, right? When he went up, it was the Durham, but now he's on his way back down, so it's on the Tzafon. Holech lemizracho shel kevesh. Again, we'll get to Keser Amos, but let's say, why is he going down on the Mizrach? Right, because the kevesh itself was 16 amos wide, so there's no point to his going down on the Ma'ariv on the west side, because he's going to be doing whatever he has to do on the east side, right? The eastern, on the width of the kevesh on the east. Now, how many amos is he walking down? It says here ke'eser amos, right? He's going down the mizrach of the kevesh for 10 amos. Okay, the truth is the Shita Mekubetz takes out the chaf adimyo, and it should be eser amos. It's exactly 10 amos. Now, when he gets down this 10 amos, because he went down the kevesh from the top of the mizbeach and he's holding the machto with the coals, is tzavar asagacholam al gabi ritzpah. His mitzvah was to pile up all these coals on the ritzpah sazora, and then they would be nivla, they would be absorbed in the ground. However, this point, which is called the what word am I looking for? We'll call it the Beis Hadeshin for the time being, just to move on. That was located Rachok min hakevesh shlosha tefachim. So there was a gap of 3 tefachim from the kevesh to this place where he put the deshin. I think we said it was a Beis Hadeshin. That's correct. The Beis Hadeshin. Okay. Again, it's not a structure. It's just a place. It's a point. It's called the Beis Hadeshin. Mokom Hadeshin, fine. So again, the Mokom Hadeshin was on the eastern side of the kevesh. And now, Mokom Shenosim Mura'a V'Notza. Right, so we've been talking about Trumas Hadeshin, but in the same place, which is called the Mokom Hadeshin or the Beis Hadeshin, that's where the Kohen, with regard to the Avod of the Olas Ha'of, had to throw the Murah and the Notza, right? We said that was called the crop and the feathers of the Olas Ha'of. Not only that, that was the same place, that Beis Hadeshin, where the Dishin Mizbeach HaPnimi, right? There was the Mizbeach HaPnimi, which had also the ashes from that which is burnt on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, let's say, and most important, the Ketores, and the menorah, right? And, the psilim, the wicks of the menorah, after the menorah was extinguished, they formed the ashes, and they have to also be placed in the same Mokom Hadeshin. Okay, now how does this prove that the Kohen who did the Avodas Olas Ha'of, and he had to throw, because the Torah requires v'hasias morasav and otzasa v'hishlich osa, how do we know that v'hishlich osa is 30 amos plus to support Rabbi Yochanan? Okay. So this has to do with calculating the diameter of a rectangle. So let's see what we can do here. It's better in the Hebrew than in the English, but I have it here in the English, so that's what we're going to use now. Okay. Now, the Makom Hadeshen, the base Hadeshen, was 10 amos north of the bottom of the kevesh. So from the bottom of the kevesh till the base Hadeshen, you have to go up 10 amos. Now, we said that the avodas olas ha'of was on the Dorom Mairov because it was too crowded in the Dorom Mizrach. And now, from the Dorom Marov, the Kohen would have to throw the moros and the notos. Now, the Mizbeach was square, and it was 32 amos on 32 amos. However, the kevesh was only 16 amos wide. From the Mairov of the Mizbeach till the kevesh was a distance of 8 amos. Now, why 8 amos? Because 3 of the 8 amos were, number 1, the Yesod, number 2, the Sovev, and number 3, the Keren. Each one was an Amma. So, Mimela, what you have to do is you have to subtract those 3 amos from the 8 amos. And that gives you 5 amos. So now the Kohen is standing on the top of the Mizbeach, and he's near that Keren, which is on the Tzfon Mizrach. Now, at this point, his distance to the Kevesh is 5 amos. Now, the Kevesh, we said, was 16 amos wide. So that means that if he is 5 amos away from the Kevesh, add that to 16, and you get 21 amos. So he's now 21 amos to the west of the Beis Hadeshen. Now, Rabbi Yochanan said that he's going to throw the notza for a distance of what? He said, Yosem Yishloshim Amma, 30 Amma. So how do we get to 30 Amma? The Beis Hadeshen, again, let's go over this, was 10 amos to the north of the Kevesh, meaning from the lower end of the Kevesh. And that would mean that if the Mizbeach is 32 amos high, then it was 22 amos from the top of the Mizbeach, because the Kevesh was also 32 amos long, just as long as to get up to the top of the Mizbeach. Now, if we allow an extra amma, because the Kohen has to stand in an amma, so in total, the Kohen was 23 amos to the north of the Beis Hadeshen. Now, the Kohen has to throw the motzah, the length of the diagonal of this rectangle. The sides of the rectangle are 21 amos and 23 amos. So you have a diagonal of a rectangle whose sides are 21 amos and 23 amos. And in order to compute the diagonal, we use, again, it's a little bit of an approximation, but it's 1 2/5 times the length of the side. And that's a sugya Masechta Sukkah of Sukkah Gula on Daf Ches. But anyway, when we use the formula, and let's say we said it's 21 amos and 23 amos, so let's say 22 amos square as the middle point. So you take 22 amos square, and the diagonal is going to be 30 amos and 4/5 of an amma. That's 22 times 1/2/5 is 30 over 4/5. Then we have to add the 3 tfachim, which is half of an amma. An amma is 6 tfachim, in the place where the Beis Hadeshen was separated from the Kevesh. So Rabbi Yochanan therefore comes to the conclusion that if the Kohen is throwing from the Dromis Maravis all the way down to the base Hadeshen, it's going to be more than 30 amos. As we said before, it's 30 and 4/5 of an amma. But the truth is that now we have to add the extra place, right? Those 3 amos. And if you add 3 tefachim, and you add the 3 tefachim, so you end up with 31 amos. Now, Rabbi Yochanan said they're going through the crop for 30 amos. He should have said 31 amos. So that's the Gemara's question now. Hani tfei mithlos v'chad avya, mokum gavri lo chosh. So Rabbi Yochanan didn't reckon the place where the person himself stood. So you minus an amos. So it turns out to be 30 amos and a little bit of change. Well, let's go on. The Mishnah says that kol ha'ola l'mizbeach. Again, we want to get the language of the Mishnah. Kol ha'olim, it's on Samach Gimel, kol ha'olim l'mizbeach olim derech yamin. Right, they go up to the top of the mizbeach through the right yamin. So that means that after they go up the kevesh, and the Kohen now turns towards the east, which is the same as turning towards his right. Right, if you're going north, then the east is towards your right. And the Gemara on Daf Samach Beis derives this from Psukim. So again, the Kohanim would ascend the kevesh on the right side of the kevesh. And what that means is that they would not have to cross the 16 amos of the width of the kevesh, because again, they wanted to turn towards the Drom Mizrach of that corner of the Mizbeach, and they're going up the Mizbeach on the Drom Mizrach. So therefore, Olim Derech Yamin, Umakifin the Yordim Derech Small. On the way down from the Kevesh, they go on the left side. However, there are 3 exceptions. Chutz min ha'ola legimel elu. Right, we spoke about the Yayin Nesech and the Mayim, for Niskei Hamayim and the Ola Sa'ov. Shayu Olim v'yordim al Akev. They didn't go down the other side towards the small, the left side of the kevish, but rather they just simply retraced their steps. Why? Because these 3 avodos are done on the Darom Myrov of the Mizbeach. Now, if the Kohen would at that point turn left, right? Right? He would be going counterclockwise around the Mizbeach, which makes it radically different than all the other avodas. So the Gemara wants to understand my time, but what's the reason for this? Why in these 3 cases where the avoda is done on the Darom Myrov corner of the Mizbeach, why does the Kohen on his way down have to circle the entire Mizbeach counterclockwise? Rabbi Yochanan, Nisachim Shemis Ashli. We're afraid that if we require of him to circle around the entire Mizbeach instead of just going directly from the Kevesh to the corner where the avodah is performed, that's the Durham Myrav, but rather tell him to go all the way around the Mizbeach, then Nisachim Shem Yisashnu. The Yayin is very sensitive to smoke. And that extra time that it takes him to go around the entire Mizbeach, which he normally would have done, would cause the smoke to be absorbed by the Yayin, and that would passel the Yayin. And not only that, the Olas Ha'of Shemetomus Be'oshan. And the bird itself might die from inhaling the smoke. So we want to get him down as quickly as possible. And instead of proceeding towards the yamin, towards the right side, which would mean going counterclockwise, he's going to just retrace his steps and go directly from the kevesh on the Durham Myriv, and instead of circling around the Mizbeach. Frekti Gemara Rabinu, what are we going to do with a Mishnah in Masechta Tamid? Bolo lahakif as Mizbeach. So now we're talking about the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol had the right to do any avoda whatsoever. He wasn't limited to one particular avoda. He has the rights to take any avoda. Me'ayin hu maschil, right? When he comes to circle the Mizbeach, where does he start from? In other words, which corner of the Mizbeach does he encounter first? Mikeren dromis mizrachis, right? Dromis mizrachis. And then he goes to the Mizrachis Tzfonis, Tzfonis Maravis, Maravis Dromis. V'nosein lo yayin l'nasech. And now they're going to give him the yayin for Nisach HaYayin. He decided that he wants to do the Nisach HaYayin. Now, in proceeding in that direction, he's going all the way around, right? He went through the northeast to the northwest, and from the southwest, and then to this. So why aren't we worried that now what's going to happen is that if the Kohen Gadol circles the entire Mizbeach, he's got wine. The Gemara now at the Hamim thinks he's holding on to the wine until he finally comes back down to the southwest corner of the Mizbeach, Maravis Dromis, which is his last stop, where he does the Nisach HaYayin. Then the Yayin would absorb the smoke. So how could Rav Yochanan say that this was a cause of concern? Apparently there was no cause of concern on Rav Yochanan. And here we turn to Daf Samach Dalid Amud Beis.